everyone. My name is Dr. Edwards-Hampton. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm actually the Director of Behavioral Health Programming here at the Weight Management Center. And I'm very excited about these new telehealth opportunities that we have to reach out to you all and connect with you virtually. Thank you for participating, and I hope that you find our discussion today valuable, and I hope that it makes an impact in the way that you think and communicate in the future. Can you guys see me okay? Okay, good. So our topic today is communication, and I think the first thing that is important to talk about is, what does communication have to do with weight? There are lots of topics that we talk about, like emotional eating and stress management, that sort of thing, that probably pretty obviously relate to weight. But how does communication have anything to do with active weight loss and maintaining weight loss? And what I'm here to suggest and argue today is that effective communication has many benefits in general to improving our quality of life. So the good thing about effective communication is that it gives us the opportunity to voice our needs. So it helps us accomplish the things that we want to accomplish by informing other people about what we're thinking, how we're feeling, and also asking them to meet our needs. In general, effective communication, as many of us know, helps us to improve our relationships. And improved relationships are likely to facilitate our weight loss goals, weight loss maintenance, but also just to generally improve our quality of life, so that we have less stress and we're less likely to get off plan and be vulnerable to things like emotional eating, stress eating, that sort of thing. I would argue that one of the best things about effective communication is it allows us to be aware of what our different thoughts and feelings are, what the differences are between our thoughts and feelings, and to take personal responsibility for our thoughts and feelings. It gives us the opportunity to own our stuff, own our role in how we're feeling and what we're doing. But it also gives us the opportunity to remove personal responsibility for other people's feelings. So one of the things that I think many of us struggle with, and that it can be hard to overcome, is feeling responsible when other people feel frustrated or bad or angry or upset. So it's really common, for example, when my husband comes home and is frustrated because the dishes in the sink haven't been cleaned, for me to feel personally responsible for his frustration. But the good thing about effective communication and being able to identify the difference between thoughts and feelings is that while he feels frustrated and I can acknowledge those feelings, I don't necessarily have to take personal responsibility for him. Those are his feelings, that's his response, and he's responsible for them, not me. And when I have emotions like possibly annoyance because he's frustrated, that is my personal responsibility. Those are my feelings, and he can't make me feel that way. No one can make you feel a certain way. And effective communication helps you identify what your feelings are and have power over those feelings. It also gives us the opportunity to assert ourselves, like I said, to ask what we need. And many people struggle with being assertive. It's very common because they feel like it's being aggressive. But what I'm here to suggest is that asking for what we need, especially in an appropriate, thoughtful, intentional way, is not the same thing as being aggressive. Aggressive typically is bullying, manipulating, approaching someone in a way that tries to intimidate them into doing or behaving in a way that's consistent with the outcomes that we want. And that really is not the same thing as self-assertion. And I think that when we confuse the two, we can end up not having our needs met, not accomplishing our goals because we're worried about being aggressive with other folks, when really we're just trying to be assertive and let other folks know how we're feeling, what we need, what we're thinking. And I would argue that self-assertion is actually, on the contrary, a very good thing, and most people appreciate it. Most people don't want to or don't like having to guess what we need and what we want, and they appreciate direct, respectful communication so that they're not having to guess what our thoughts and needs are. Effective and good communication can also help boost our coping skills. So when we're feeling upset, maybe we're angry at, our boss or a colleague because of an interaction that happens, instead of coping via maybe going to the break room and eating a donut, or feeling frustrated all day and then not going to work out because it's just been a bad day and we just want to go home and go to sleep. We actually have the opportunity to communicate those feelings and our needs so that we're coping in a way that helps us manage those emotions, that does not include eating or sabotaging our lifestyle goals. Effective communication also helps us improve our locus of control. So locus of control is kind of technical jargon, but really what it means is how much power we feel like we have around and what impact we feel like we have on the world around us. So folks who have a really low internal locus of control basically feel like they don't have any power to change their environment, that they can talk to folks, they can try different behaviors, but no matter what, things are just going to be the same. Nothing's going to get better. I don't have any power to change or improve my environment. Folks with a high internal locus of control feel confident and feel as though they do have the power and the ability to change their life situation and impact their environment. One thing that can really help folks improve their internal locus sense of control and feel like they're empowered and able to change their environment in a positive way or in a way that's consistent with them meeting their goals is effective communication. Being able to, again, talk to other people, being confident in our ability to voice our experience, our thoughts, our emotions, and what we need. So I want to go ahead and just take a moment to offer you guys the opportunity to ask any questions. One of the questions that I have posted on the PowerPoint today is, can you guys think of any other ways that the benefits above may successfully impact weight loss and weight loss maintenance, ways maybe that I haven't discussed or identified? So we have one participant saying no, they can't think of any way, which is just fine. But it looks like we have a couple other participants typing in, so we'll just give them a minute to see what folks are saying. Yep. So one of the participants is saying that open communications helps set boundaries with others in regard to your weight loss plan, which is great, right? So it helps teach others how to interact with us and support us in our weight loss plan, and it also helps them to be accountable to the boundaries that we're setting related to our weight loss plan. And then we had another participant who said hands-on contact, which at first I wasn't sure, but then she sort of provided a little bit more detail. I think it's a great point. She said that communication allows for hands-on contact. So communication is great, particularly with regard to your visits with the doctors, with the leaders, with the different dietitians on the team, because it gives you the opportunity to have hands-on contact with them. And so you're not guessing about what you should be doing, and if what you're doing is right, you're being open, you're asking, and you're getting open communication from them in return. Any other input or thoughts? Looks like we may have a couple more folks queuing in or chiming in. Yep, so we have another participant that's saying that group sessions are really great for communication because it allows sharing of ideas, which is actually a great point and really something that I haven't touched on. So having opportunity for communication allows us to get new ideas and generate new ways to solve problems. And so when we're talking to folks about what we're struggling with, how we're feeling, what we need, we can ask them for things, and sometimes that might be asking them to stop a certain behavior, start a certain behavior, but also it may be just asking for help, ways to problem solve or overcome whatever barriers or difficulties we're experiencing. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide, and if we have anyone else chime in, we'll certainly address that. So it looks like this slide may have had some formatting issues, but what we're going to talk about now is the nuts and bolts of good communication. So I think the first thing to keep in mind is that good communication, the hallmark of good communication is that you're not just talking. And, it may be hard initially to think about, well, what's, good communication is about talking. But I think all of us can probably recognize a time where we felt like we've been talked at. And that's what I'm talking about here is you don't want to be talking at anyone, and you don't want them to be talking at you. Good communication has two parts to it. There are speakers and listeners, and both participants in the communication, or all the participants in the communication, should be active speakers and listeners. You should be intending to send and receive info, not just send info. And we all have been in situations where we have attempted to communicate with someone who we feel like is only interested in sending information, and it typically is not a productive or comfortable or happy conversation. And we probably all have been in situations where we've attempted to communicate, but we really have only been receptive to sending information, not to receiving information. So another important part of good communication is planning. And I think you have to sort of know yourself and know about the conversation. Some of us may need to spend some really intentional time sitting down and planning how we're going to communicate something, especially if the conversation is highly sensitive or really important and deserves a certain amount of time warranted to plan it. So for example, if I'm going to sit down and talk with my boss about how work expectations lately I feel like have been really unreasonable, then I'm probably going to want to sit down and spend some time planning out that conversation before I do it. But there may be other conversations that maybe are with a friend or a significant other, or colleague, that we can just spend a couple minutes beforehand thinking, okay, what am I feeling? How am I going to relay this information to them? The thing to really think about with planning, I think a really good cue, is how emotionally escalated are you? So typically the more emotionally escalated you are, or the more emotionally sensitive the subject is for you, the more planning you should do before the conversation. And I would also argue that part of important planning is making sure that that emotional experience that you're having is regulated, or the edge of it is off enough where you can actually have a productive conversation where you can be a speaker and an active listener, not just a speaker. Often when we're very emotionally escalated or upset or charged about something, we are not in a position to be an active listener. So I have here, remember Mom always told me to think before I speak. Some of the things to think about on plan is to identify the difference between thoughts and feelings, okay? So can you guys, anyone give me some examples or kind of contribute their thoughts about what the difference is between a thought and a feeling? Let me do this. I'll give you some examples, and then you guys just type in whether or not you think it's a thought or a feeling. What if I said, I'm not sure I can do this? Is that a thought or a feeling? Okay, unanimously we have thought, and that's correct. Obviously there is probably some feelings underlying that thought, but that is actually a thought. What about, this is really hard? Is that a thought or a feeling? So this one's actually tricky, and that's part of the reason why I asked you it, because saying this is really hard, there's a lot of emotion to it, but that is actually a thought. That is not the feeling. And one way that you can sort of identify is, what is the feeling that you hear in this is really hard? Where's the feeling word? Hard isn't a feeling word, even though it may seem like one. Or sorry, we have a participant here who's saying, they're not female, and so they're not good at feelings. So I was tickled by that. But for the record, men are good at identifying feelings too. And if you do, whether you're male or female, if you do identify that you're not good at recognizing feelings, and this is something that's really important for you to practice, because when you're communicating, you are likely to confuse your thoughts for feelings and vice versa, or confuse other people's thoughts for feelings. And it's really important to get good at identifying the difference, because that's a hallmark to good communication. And we'll get to why that is in just a minute. But going back to, this is really hard. We can all empathize with what the underlying feeling most likely is, but there's not an actual feeling word in that. That person may feel frustrated, they may feel sad, they may feel discouraged. We can all sort of try to presume what the underlying emotion is, but that's actually a thought, not a feeling. What about that was rude? Thought or a feeling? So we have one feeling, one thought, couple thoughts. How do we tell the difference? Okay, so that's a good question. So that was rude is actually a thought. We're thinking about a behavior. What might be a feeling that would be another, what would be a way to express the thought that was rude with a feeling? Okay, so we have someone say, I'm offended by what she just did, which is perfect, right? You made me angry. Okay, so the feeling is anger that we identify there. Okay, let me see if I understand this question. Don't you have to be offending and have that feeling to make the thought? So I think the question here is, don't you have to have the feeling before you have the thought? And that's actually a really good question, and I think most people would actually argue, I don't know that we entirely know, it's kind of like the chicken or the egg, what comes first, the emotion or the thought, but most people would argue that feelings tend to follow thoughts, right? So I've done this example before in the Optifast group, but here's an example of how feelings follow thoughts. So when we say that was rude, let's assume we're walking down the hall and someone that we're acquaintance with, we don't know really how we stand with them, but we've been friendly before, they walk by and they make eye contact with you and you smile at them and you say hi and they completely don't respond at all, okay? So now I have a thought. If I have a thought, that was rude, now I'm feeling offended. If I have a thought, wow, there must be something really going on with them, they're distracted, now I have a completely different feeling, which is empathy. So typically we interpret the event and then we have a responding emotion. Does that make sense to you guys? The idea here is that typically thoughts come first, we interpret our environment, our events, and then emotions follow. But certainly, as one of the participants said here, thoughts and feelings interact with one another, and they tend to be a trickle effect, right? So if I think that was rude, now I'm feeling self-conscious, annoyed, frustrated, now I'm probably going to have more thoughts and more behaviors throughout the day that are consistent with those feelings, and it becomes sort of this whole snowball effect. And the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind here is that thoughts are a lot easier to change than feelings. So, one of the things, I've said this in group also, one of the things my dad would say to me when I was a kid was, decide not to be angry, decide not to be upset. And I used to find that really frustrating because I'd be like, how can you decide not to be angry? How can you decide not to be sad? It's true, it's really hard to decide not to feel a certain way. But it's a lot easier to change the way that we think about something and then let the emotions follow. So when I first think, wow, that was rude, she totally ignored me, I can try to restructure that and say, well, I don't really know what happened there. Maybe, she was really distracted because she has something really important going on in her life, and maybe I should reach out to her and make sure everything's okay. And now I've restructured that thought and am having a different emotional response. So anyway, so sorry, I'm reading some of the feedback, and this is great. Yeah, so it all starts with being aware, right? Being aware of the thoughts that we're having and what emotions they're leading to, and the difference between thoughts and emotions. The next thing I have here is thinking about I statements versus you statements. So we actually had a really good example up above in some of the dialogue. I think that, I'm going to scroll up and see. So one person said, when I asked to give input about the difference between a feeling and a thought and how we might come up with a feeling that's associated with the comment that was rude or the thought that was rude, one person said, I'm offended by what she just did. And then another person said, you made me angry, which are both ways to describe feelings. Those are feelings, not thoughts. But there's a big difference. One is an I statement and one is a you statement. I'm offended by what she just did, and you made me angry. What's the difference, and why does the I statement versus you statement make? Why is that an important distinction? What's the impact? So responsibility. I is not attacking. Good, yep. So it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the first slide is, as much as this is hard for us to believe and accept, other people can't make us feel anyway. We are responsible for our emotions. The good news is we can't make other people feel a certain way either. So we are not responsible for their feelings or their emotional response. So an I statement takes responsibility of, this is how I am feeling right now. It's not placing blame to, you made me feel this way. Okay? And there are some really good or important benefits to using I statements, because with communication, when you say, you made me feel angry, then you are giving them the opportunity to argue for the fact that they didn't do anything to make you angry, or they weren't wrong, or you're basically inviting an argument or inviting them to disagree with you. When you state that in response to what someone did that you feel sad, it's a lot harder for them to argue with. Basically, you're just telling them how you feel, and it's hard to argue with feelings, okay? And so you're taking responsibility for your emotions, but you're also not letting or giving them the opportunity to fight or argue with your emotions. And so one really important part of effective communication is using I statements and trying to stay away from you statements when you are explaining your thoughts and feelings. You statements can have an appropriate place in effective communication, and we'll talk about where they belong later on. It's more in the active listening realm. But the I statements are really important for you to take personal responsibility, but also to assert yourself in a way where you can be heard and not argued with. So I would argue that I statements are actually really empowering, even though many of us may feel like we want to place the responsibility on someone else for how we feel or our emotional response. Does that make sense? So kind of going into planning a little bit more, it can be helpful, especially for those who are really inclined to sort of be emotionally impulsive or kind of lash out, or folks who are really uncomfortable with being direct and being assertive, or folks who have a really hard time identifying the difference between thoughts and feelings. You may want to sit down and really plan out, okay, what am I trying to convey here? What's the information? What are my thoughts? What are my feelings? What do I need? You may even want to write it out, literally write it out. Also, consider your audience. You want to speak their language. The way that you speak to your boss to convey, to communicate effectively may be very different than how you would talk to maybe your spouse or significant other or your 12-year-old child. And so consider who your audience is and speak a language that's going to be accessible and appropriate for them. Stay on point. And so this means that when you go in, you talk about a specific behavior incident. You don't meander back to 1999 when this happened or that happened. So you really try to stay pretty succinct and on point. And then you also want to make sure, be aware that your body's telling the same story, right? So if I'm trying to convey that I want to have effective kind of open communication, and I go in to talk to my boss, and I'm kind of like, I'm like looking away while they're talking, or I'm looking at the floor because I'm super nervous and I'm kind of wringing my hands and that sort of thing. That may be your body telling a different story than what you're actually trying to communicate. Sometimes we have to fake it till we make it. So we may feel very nervous internally, but try to be mindful of what outward signals you're sending, and try to train and practice having your body be present in a way that's consistent with what you are trying to communicate. All right, any thoughts? Any other thoughts or questions so far before I move to the next slide? Have any of you guys ever heard about the SBI model before, situation, behavior, impact? This is common in the business world. It's common in the HR world. I don't know if any of you guys live in that world. Anyone heard of this before or familiar with it? Okay, so it looks like there's some familiarity with it. But this actually gives you a really concrete way, kind of structured way, to start practicing providing effective feedback. So this is called the Situation, Behavior, Impact, or SBI model. And so the first thing you do in this model is you describe the situation. And this is the type of thing that you can literally sit down and plan, and write out before you go and give this feedback to an individual. So you describe the situation. You want to be very specific, okay? So you don't want to just say, you've been bringing a bunch of crap into the house and it's getting me off plan, right? You need to be very specific about what kind of things may be challenging for you. And then you describe how the person's behavior impacts you in a practical way, okay? So this is not like, and it makes me angry. We're not trying to say how it makes you feel. We're trying to say what direct impact does that behavior have on you. And then you have the opportunity to describe how it makes you feel using an I statement. So this is the situation, this is how it impacts me, and then this is how that outcome makes me feel. And then you ask for what you need. Okay, so here's an example. I go home to my husband and I say, over the past week, you have ordered pizza to the house 2 times. Okay, so that's the situation. The way that it impacts me. I love pizza, and when it is in the home, I often eat it. And now, the way it makes me feel. When I eat the pizza, I feel sadness, shame, and regret. So my need is, please don't bring pizza into the home. Okay? See how that's a way to address a behavior, a problematic behavior that's negatively impacting your goals or your weight loss or weight loss maintenance in a way that is not accusatory and is hard to incite conflict or an argument. You're really not blaming anyone. You're just saying there's this behavior. When this behavior happens, I often give in and eat it. It's hard for me to say no. And then I feel really bad about it. So please don't bring pizza into the home. okay? And I'm not saying that this, you know, we all have those folks around us who aren't supportive. And so I'm not saying that necessarily you have, you know, the most amazing spouse or teenager or whatever who's like, okay, I promise I'll never bring it into the home again. They may say, well, why should your weight loss plan impact me, blah, blah. I understand that this may not always end up in the outcome that you like, but this is the way to communicate in a way that is most likely to be effective and personally responsible. And even if it doesn't work every time, it's a good thing to practice, because there are those folks in our lives that are supportive or want to help us, who just need to know how to do that and need us to help them understand what's helpful, what's not helpful, and what our needs are. So we have another example of positive feedback, which I love. Thank you for this. So we have a participant who says, over the past week, you've been bringing in and making more healthy foods. I love that. When we share this, I feel better and happier. Please continue this. So that's great. That's a great example. And I think I love that one of the participants brings this up, because I think that a really important part of effective communication is reinforcing good behaviors and knowing how to thank folks who are doing helpful things or supportive things in our lives. Okay. So the next, some of you are ahead of me, the next idea was to do some practice. So if you guys feel comfortable, I'd love for you to type in scenarios, but also I can kind of give you maybe some starting framework. So let's say we have a coworker at work that keeps, do you guys have a habit of going and having an afternoon sweet snack together, and she keeps coming and inviting you to go and have, you know, a cookie in the break room with you? So how might you use SBI in that situation? Okay, so we have one person who says, take yogurt, put it in the refrigerator, and eat your yogurt while she eats her cookie, which I think is a really good behavioral strategy or alternative. But keep in mind here, we're trying to communicate our needs. So what might be a way that you would assertively try to not necessarily manage the behavior by eating yogurt instead of cookies, but actually ask her to stop enticing you with the invitation to go eat off plan. So we have another person who said, I'd love to go and share sometime, but sweets aren't for me. If you want, I brought extra celery sticks, want to share. Okay. So here's another one. I love hanging out with you, so when you finish eating your cookie, maybe we could go for a quick walk, because I really can't be around cookies right now. Okay, so these are all good, you know, kind of ways to manage the situation, but let's think specifically with kind of assertive communication. So we're really trying to tell her what about her behavior is problematic for us. And the reason why this can be important is sometimes we can't just say, okay, you know, let's have celery, or I hear that you want to hang out with me, but that's not the context I want to do it in, that sort of thing. But the problem with that is the behavior can continue, right? Sometimes we have to grab the bull by the horns and say, look, I need you to stop doing this. So let's sort of come up with what that might look like, where we're not kind of dodging the bullet, but actually saying, you're engaging in this behavior and it's really not helpful, please don't continue to do it. So this may be something along the lines of, okay, the situation is, you sit down with this coworker and you say, I'm trying really hard to lose weight and establish a new healthy lifestyle, right? So that's the situation. That's what I'm trying to do, behavior. that's a situation. Now the behavior. We have a habit in the past of eating a sweet snack in the afternoon together, and you're continuing to invite me to do that. That's the behavior, right? We've done this in the past. You're continuing to invite me to do that. Now's the impact. When you invite me to eat a snack in the afternoon, a sweet snack in the afternoon, I feel really tempted, and I start thinking about the food and then start having an emotional response of feeling deprived. Okay? And I don't like feeling deprived. It makes me at risk for going off plan. And so the need is, please don't come to my office in the afternoon anymore and ask me to do our sweet snack, right? And then we may say, but I'd love to hang out and do something alternative. But the idea here is that you practice directly addressing the problematic behavior, not finding a workaround. Because the idea here is that you're practicing and getting comfortable being assertive, not dodging having to be assertive by, eating celery sticks instead or whatnot. Because honestly, here's the thing. If you guys have a habit for the past 2 years of having a sweet snack in the afternoon together, and you're like, all right, I'm going to do carrots and ranch instead, or maybe not ranch, carrots and celery instead. If you keep doing that, eventually, many of us, it's just a matter of time until we end up giving into that sweet snack again. It's hard to sit there and be exposed to that thing that we enjoy and that habit, and over a long period of time sustain the carrots over the cookies. And so sometimes we really have to be assertive and just remove, the opportunity or the temptation. Does that make sense? So let's try another scenario, okay? Remember, we are trying to not come up with an alternative behavior, but we're actually trying to assertively address the problem through communication, okay? So let me think of another scenario. I'm trying to think of one that I hear commonly. Let's say you have a child who keeps bringing into the house, like a teenager who keeps bringing into the house like Little Debbie's and snack cakes and that sort of thing. How might, if you felt like you directly needed to address that behavior, how might you handle that? What's the situation? So it looks like we have a few folks that are typing in. Another thing I think that's important to keep in mind when we think about effective communication, we actually start playing this out in scenarios, is that I think we often, when we're trying to communicate effectively, we try to solve the other person's, problem. And so we're tempted to say something like, I don't want you to bring, Little Debbie snack cakes into the home. but you can eat them outside of the home, or you can keep them in your car or whatever. And sometimes that can be helpful, but keep in mind that really assertive communication, effective communication is telling an individual how their behavior impacts you, how it makes you feel, and what you need. It doesn't mean that you have to solve their problem of needing a sweet, partner in crime for an afternoon sweet snack, or that you need to solve your teenager's problem of wanting Little Debbie's. All right, looks like we have a few folks typing, but I don't see anything coming through. So keep typing if you're coming up with a solution, but I'm going to move on to the next. Oh, here we go. We've got some. All right, so someone just said, sounds like this was a timely example. I currently am struggling with my kids having candy or chocolate in my house, and I find it difficult to restrict them because it's my issue, not theirs. So I'm looking for ways to keep it out of my face. For example, I'm asking my husband to hide the candy from me. Anyone have any input about how this participant may be able to manage that, maybe even using SBI? So we have another participant that says, I know that you love Little Debbie's, but they are too much of a temptation for me. I would really appreciate that you do not bring them into the house. When I eat them, I feel out of control and unhappy. Yep. So that's good. I would just say switch around the emotion from the end and put the need at the end. Yeah, so, and here's the other thing, and then we'll kind of move on, that I'll just say to the participant who's struggling with children bringing candy into home. I realize that it can be difficult because we can feel like I shouldn't deprive my children of this or that just because I struggle with my weight and I can't, control myself around sweets or whatever. And I understand that dilemma, but keep in mind too that, sweets and junk food are not an important food group. So, if we're not allowing our children to have that, we're limiting their access to it in the home. It's really it's not. I'm sorry, I'm reading some of the feedback here. It's not necessarily that you're depriving them of a major food group. And so maybe just thinking about boundaries around those foods and modeling healthy sort of behaviors for them. So these are some variations on SBI. So some of them, another one may be empathic communication, which kind of came out when we were talking about the first scenario with the woman or the colleague that was coming for the sweet snack in the afternoon. So one of the things that came out from a lot of you was empathic communication, because you realized that it looked like she was looking for some connection. And so empathic communication may be voicing sort of this understanding that it looks like you want to connect or spend time, or, I know that you're trying to help me, but wanting to eat out for dinner every night isn't helpful, that sort of thing. And here's some things that I touched on before. So when you are being assertive, use I statements, don't make it personal, and don't do it if you're emotionally flooded. So if you're really upset or emotionally escalated, then don't choose that time to try to have a sort of communication, because when we're emotionally flooded, it's really hard to tell the difference between our thoughts and our feelings. So the other part of effective communication is being a good listener. And so the first thing is correct understanding. So this is when you statements can actually be helpful or valuable. So this may be when someone speaks, you say, I want to make sure I understand you correctly. It sounds like you feel frustrated with whatever. And so that's really just reflecting the individual's thoughts and feelings so that you make sure you really understand what they're trying to communicate to you. In order to do that, you can't be planning your next argument, which many of us have done before. We know what that's like. Where we're sort of not really listening because we heard the first thing that they said and now we're planning our rebuttal. Active listening also involves body language, so making sure that we're making eye contact, that we have an open stance, so instead of being like this or turned, that we're sort of open and accepting. And it can be repeating the individual statements and also reflecting the emotional content of their statements. So active leading can be reflecting and then recapping the whole message that the individual is trying to send. So a key point here is practice makes perfect. So I encourage each of you to complete this weekly challenge where you practice SBI and listening skills intentionally one time a day for the next 7 days. So each day, even if it's minor, think of a way where you can use SBI to communicate assertively with someone. This may be your medical provider about something you need. This may be your behaviorist, which lately you haven't found very helpful, but you feel nervous telling them that you're not really benefiting from it. Maybe it's a group leader because you found that group isn't helpful or productive. Maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a child. But really think and practice using SBI, even if it's on a small scale, once a day. And if you guys you guys can even get online and find handouts where you can print them out and write SBI out. But I challenge you to do it once a day for the next 7 days. And then when you actually deliver the communication to the individual, really practice active listening and try to identify what are they trying to say, what are their thoughts, what are their feelings, that sort of thing. So for those of you who are logged on via your phone, which it looks like the only person who was may have left the room, but if you don't have access to the communication handout, then you'll have access through the link once we finish up today. So make sure at the end of our meeting today that you stay signed on and complete the link that shows that you participated in this session. That way you can get the communication handout, but you can also get credit for attending today, because we want to make sure we give you guys credit for attending. Before we close up, are there any final thoughts or questions, maybe even some more advice to the individual who's really struggling with having the sweets in the home because of their children, but feel like it's unrealistic to get rid of the candy and the sweets out of the house? So we have some folks typing in, but meanwhile I'll sort of fill in this space. So I think if it's unrealistic to ask them to keep it out the house completely, what is realistic for you to ask of them to help limit the temptation? So ask them to keep it out of your sight, out of the pantry. What is it assertively that you can ask? What do you need that would be helpful, that is realistic for the family system? Because I understand that we don't exist in vacuums, and we can't expect the world to revolve around our weight loss plans or our lifestyle goals. So if it is unrealistic to ask them to keep it out of the house completely, then what is a realistic goal? What is a realistic request? And it sounds like, putting it in the back of the pantry, or maybe even somewhere else. Sometimes it can be hard if you know it's in the back of the pantry. But some of it, as I was suggesting earlier, and I know it's easier said than done, but it may also be just getting comfortable with saying no to having certain things in the house. So maybe there are some things that are sweet that they eat that you're not really tempted by, but maybe there are some things that are really problematic for you, and maybe those are the things that you ask don't come into the house. So I'm just allowing for a couple minutes for last comments. Looks like a few folks are typing. Okay, so the participant who's been struggling with the kids eating says that that they have been pretty good about setting some boundaries, but that she still has a hard time, even when they're limiting the amount of stuff that comes into the home, still has a hard time staying away from it, which I understand. And so this may be something that isn't necessarily going to be solved by SBI feedback, but something certainly I encourage you to continue to discuss with your behaviorist, so that you can come up with different behavioral strategies to make sure that you're not being overwhelmed by cravings and giving into those sweet things. One thing I will say also with sweets is that they do tend to sort of have an addictive quality to them, and so the longer you abstain and really stay away from them, the easier it does tend to get. So I don't know where you are in the program, but I'd encourage you just try to stay away from them so that you're not perpetuating those cravings. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap up there. Thank you for participating and for hanging with me as I kind of bumbled through my first virtual experience. It was a pleasure being able to provide this information, and thank you for your participation. And like I said, make sure you hit that link before you sign out so that you can get credit for attending.